Hello, my friends. This is Eric Parker with One Number Tableau Experts, and in this week's Tableau video, we want to run through the basics of Tableau table calculations with you. How do they work? How do you understand them? What does some of the interface mean? All that good stuff, okay? So where we're actually going to start is by comparing table calculations to a regular calculated field, okay? So when you create a regular calculated field in Tableau, meaning you're not using a table calculation function, kind of the simplest way to think about that is that you're essentially adding a new column to your data source. Now, you don't need to worry about affecting your underlying data. It's not gonna, edit your SQL tables or Excel or anything like that. A calculated field is just basically, creating a new column of data. So that's the basic idea of just a normal calculation. You're just using math operators or, things of that nature, okay? So kind of next up in our food chain would be aggregations, right? So Tableau is just a tool that naturally aggregates data. It takes measures and it summarizes numerous rows of information into values. And what Tableau does is its aggregations takes cues from the dimensions in a worksheet to figure out how many values it should provide. So for example, in this very basic visual here, right, we've got a little table of data. It's got 7 rows of data, 2 rows for A, 2 rows for B, 3 rows for C, right? So if I ask Tableau to give me my average sales at the product level, the average of 10 and 20 would be 15. The average of 25 and 35 would be 30, right? You get the idea. 855 would be 6. Okay, cool. So that's just the idea of an aggregation. Tableau uses a function like average or sum or min or max, uses an aggregation to take numerous rows of data and just provide a single value. Okay, so that brings us to the doorstep of table calculations, okay? So with a table calculation, the idea is these already aggregated values, like these bars, these data points in a worksheet, we want to now apply some sort of like math, maybe some level of aggregation to those values, right? So for example, if I want to know what is the average of these 3 bars, well, these bars are already aggregations, right? The aggregation is taking the rows of data and then summarizing those rows into a singular value. So what a table calculation does is it could look at the data points themselves and apply some additional logic. So if you said, what is the window average of my average sales, you're telling Tableau, take the values 15, 30, and 6, add those together to get 51. And now there's 3 of those, so take 51 divided by 3. So our window average would be 17, okay? So let's go ahead and actually build that concept out in Tableau. We'll actually use window average, and we'll look at some other examples here in just a minute as well. Okay, so diving into this, I've got a bar chart which is showing me sales by subcategory, right? So just kind of a reminder, there's a lot of rows of data that goes into creating this, right? So I can see there's 889 orders of phones and there's 217 of fasteners and just, thousands of rows of data represented here. So let's say I want to know which category's overall sales is above the average, right? The average of the subcategories, okay? So how do I get the average of the subcategories? So if you're wise to Tableau, you may know that you could just use a reference line and we'll eventually get there, but we're gonna start by doing this the longhand way. So what I'm gonna ask Tableau to do is what is my window average sum of sales? Okay, so what does that mean? I'm gonna say window average sum of sales. It's pretty literal with my definition there, okay? So I'm saying, give me my sum of sales, right? You look at my status bar down here, you'll see there are 17 of those, 17 subcategories. So give me those 17 unique values and find the average of those 17. Okay, so I'm gonna throw that field on detail in my marks card for a minute. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a reference line which references my calculation. So I'll say add reference line, and I wanna show the window average sum of sales. Let's add a nice label to this bad boy so we can actually see what it is. So I'll say average and insert and value. So I can see the average subcategory sales is $135,000. And roughly half of the subcategories are above that, and roughly half of those are below that. Right, so maybe I want another calculation which would tell me, is the bar above the average? So I could say something like, sum of sales above average. Okay, so just a very simple logical function. I might just say something like sum of sales greater than or equal to, and I could either write it all out by hand or just reference that calculation again. So is my sum of sales greater than or equal to the window average sum of sales? Basically the average of the bars. So I drop that on color. I don't love the colors that Tableau picked for me, so thanks but no thanks Tableau. Maybe something like this. So now I could see, okay, cool. You know, some of them are, some of them aren't. Heck, I could even use that thing as a filter and just allow my user to decide what it is they want to look at. Although, I just thought of this. Oh, that works pretty well actually, yeah. There you go. So I can see above average, below average. I could even isolate them like that. Okay, so quick side note, some of you, if you've been using Tableau for a bit, you might be looking at that filter and saying like, what the heck? I thought that filters usually would affect an average, right? What I mean by that is, so normally, if let's say we filtered this based on like a random region, like, oh, we just want to see what happened with sales in the West. That would affect the average, right? The average dropped from 135,000 to 42,000. And maybe some values that were above average are now below average, right? So a typical filter, yes, that would affect a table calculation. But that sum of sales above window average, that's actually a table calculation filter, okay? So I didn't mean to go this crazy and this deep yet, especially if this is your first time looking at table calcs. Maybe you need to watch this video twice because I'm kind of covering a lot of ground here. But a regular dimension filter in Tableau happens here, whereas a table calc filter happens here. And a table calculation itself is processed here. So if your filter includes a table calculation function like window average, then the value would be computed before the table calc filter gets applied. So this is not really the right way of saying this, and Tableau would probably give me a slap on the wrist for saying it, but I like to think of a table calc filter as basically kind of hiding the data you don't want to see, as opposed to truly filtering it out. That's not technically true, but for all intents and purposes, it might as well be. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program, because that was a bit of a deep dive there. Let's talk about some other examples of table calculations you might want to do. So we just looked at using window average, but there's a lot of different ways you might use table calculations. You might want to rank your data points. You might want to calculate a percent of total or a percent difference, right? Those are all great use cases for where a table calculation function might be useful for you, okay? And we're gonna come back to this part in just a minute, but once you start to have multiple dimensions in your worksheet, you may need to clarify to Tableau how exactly you want your table calculation to perform. So let's use percent of total as a diving board to be able to jump into this conversation. Okay, so let's say I've got a worksheet like this. It's just one dimension, subcategory, one measure, sum of sales. And I want to know what percent of total sales does each subcategory make up. So I'm going to get a copy of sales and throw that on my marks card, throw it in the label tab. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the drop down on this sum of sales on label, and I'm going to add a table calculation. Okay, so really there's kind of two ways of adding a table calculation. Number one is what I'm showing you now, which is just use the Tableau's dialog. Option two is what we did the first time around with window average, is you create a calculated field, and then there's a whole host of table calculation functions that you can utilize, dozens of them. So we're gonna cover a few of them in this video, certainly not all of them. We'll do some of the others in future videos, and if you have any questions about any of them in particular, you can let me know. Okay, so whoops, didn't mean to do that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit the drop down on my sum of sales, it's on label. And because I only have one dimension, I could probably just get away with a quick table calculation, say percent of total, and I'm good to go. So if you look closely at my labels now, you can see that it's no longer the actual dollar amounts of sales, it's actually percentages, okay? If you ever wanna format that, you can right click on your pill and select format. And then here, maybe I say something like, oh, I do want a percentage, but I don't need 2 decimal places, just 1 is fine. Okay. Your visual cue that a field is a table calculation or is utilizing a table calculation function is that white triangle on the right side of the pill. So you can see that is now no longer the original sum of sales like the one up here on the column shelf. It's now the table calculation variety. Some additional layer of logic is applied to it. All right. Next up, what happens when you do have multiple dimensions in your worksheet, right? So what percent of what percent of each region sales does each subcategory make up? So in this case, I want to know what percentage of the central sales is phones, what percentage of the east sales is phones, and so on like that. So in essence, I want to set this up so that each column adds up to 100%. Okay, so this time around, I'll add sales to label again. But now I probably can't get away with just doing a quick table calculation. I'm going to go into the add table calculation dialog. Okay, so in this add table calculation dialog, first up is what type of table calculation am I trying to create? So in this case, we're doing percent of total still. And then next up would be what is my compute using, which is Tableau saying basically, what is the scope of the percent of total? Like what should add up to 100%? Each row, each column, the entire worksheet, okay? So I'm gonna go back to a dashboard in a minute that has like a little kind of cheat sheet with some vocabulary for us. But the first thing is that you can just think of table as basically meaning the same thing as worksheet. So Tableau saying, okay, the scope is the worksheet, but then next up you have to clarify the direction, right? So across basically means, row. So each row would add up to 100%. Down is, I don't know how to say it other than just down, vertical, right? So each column adds up to 100%. And then if there's no direction selected, like table, I'm just going to put none in parentheses, equals like basically all directions. So in this case, the entire worksheet would add up to 100%. Okay, so check out the differences as I do this. So if I select table across, I can see that chairs sales from the central region makes up 25% of all chair sales. That's what that's saying. Table down, now chairs is 17%. What does that mean? Chairs makes up 17% of all sales in the central region. Table, this means that central region chair sales make up 3.7% of all sales across the entire business. So to answer the question at the top of the sheet, table down. What percent of each region sales does each subcategory make up? Okay. Just kind of go back to this quickly, right? So we've talked about now one of the scopes. We've just covered off what is table, and we're going to talk about some of these directions as well. Okay. Next up, intermediate. We already did that. Next up, advanced. What happens if you have like 3 or more dimensions, right? So now the question is now changed a little bit. Again, what percent of each category's sales per region comes from each subcategory? A bit of a mouthful, but basically it's saying the unique combination of region and category, that should add up to 100%, right? So in this case, there's 4 regions and 3 categories. So we should have 12 different sections of this worksheet, which add up to 100%. So sales goes to label. It's going to get visually busy, but that's okay. I'm going to add table calculation. So those same concepts from our last section there, actually it's not set to percent of total yet. Let me do that first. So our same concepts from before apply here. Table across, each row adds up to 100%. Table down, each column. Table, the entire worksheet. But now a new option that's available to us would be selecting Pane as a scope. So Pane, not P-A-I-N, like ow, that hurts, which maybe your brain does at this point in the video, but Pane, like window pane. Now we have an option called Pane. So Pane across isn't going to do much for us, but Pane down will. So what is Pane? The way that I think about Pane is that it's the parent level dimension. Okay, so what that means is that right now, subcategory is the child level dimension and category is the parent level dimension, right? Meaning that each child, these 4 children, all roll up to a parent. So furniture breaks down into chairs, tables, bookcases, and furnishings. Okay, so what we're saying is I want to go down, but I want the scope to be just the pane. So just stop when you hit a new parent level dimension. So furniture, and then next up would be office supplies. So when you hit office supplies, restart, we're doing a new percent of total. Okay, and this is really not kind of super helpful for what we're doing, but just to show you this, like, I'm afraid this is going to get really visually busy. Yeah, I'm going to regret it. But the percent of total is still at the category level, right? Subcategory is child, category is parent. Now ship mode is the grandparent level, okay? So this is still the scope as defined by Pane down. I don't actually want ship mode in here, just wanted to explain that it's always that second to last dimension. All right, back into this bad boy. So actually I think we're good to go, right? So I can see that chairs makes up 52% of all furniture sales in the central region. So if I toggle all those on, that should add up to 100%. I guess I might have to do the math myself, but we're just gonna assume that's true. Okay, so now we've got to talk about Pane as yet another. What is going on with this thing? Go away, Tableau. Okay, no, stop it. Okay. All right, anyway, so now we've got to talk about Pane. So cell, that's the last one, not particularly relevant to what we're doing right now, but cell would be, cell is basically data point. So percent of total is not really a good one for cell. If I said something like each cell should add up to 100%, every bar is 100%. Not super useful, right? Okay, cool. So let's look at one more example of table calculations just to kind of get, a third view into this. So we've done window average, we've now done percent of total. Now we're gonna do percent difference from one time period to another. Okay, so here I've got quarterly sales visualized as a bar. So let's say I wanna know what is the difference of sales from one quarter to the next. Is it up 10%? Is it down 20%? What are these numbers? So a copy of sales goes to, let's do color this time. So sales goes to color. I'm gonna hit the drop down on the sum of sales and add a table calculation, okay? From within here, I am going to say, I want the percent difference from the previous, okay? And then, I guess actually that's it. I've just got kind of quarter, it's kind of rolling like that. So this is only like so useful to us, right? In the sense that like the values are kind of going up throughout the course of the year, big drop off, up, big drop off, up, and over again. So basically every time Q1 rolls around, it's like, yeah, there was a big drop off. It's like, that's not really telling us anything we can't see already. So it might be interesting to sort of mix this up a little bit. And instead say compare, the quarter to that same quarter from the prior year. That's probably a better apples to apples comparison. Okay, so we're gonna do that. We're gonna customize our table calc. Real quick before we do that, I hope I'm not repeating myself, but if you check out this link up here, this info button in the upper right corner, or whatever corner that is, whatever side, we have videos. We have classes that we run every month on Tableau topics ranging from the beginners bit classes to advanced classes, calculations, advanced calculations, Tableau prep, all kinds of stuff. So if you're interested in that, getting some more extra kind of hands-on time with us, we would love to have you join us. So you can check out the events and the dates up there by selecting that link. Okay, so we've got our percent difference, and this is just sort of our simple variety. So what I'm gonna do actually is I'm gonna duplicate this sheet so that we can do a more advanced version of this, okay? So let me just rename my sheet here. So right now, if I edit this table calculation, I will see that Tableau is setting the value relative to the previous value, basically saying, what is this number and compare it to that number, and does that for every bar. Now, unfortunately, there's no default option here which says, look at last year's value or 4 points ago, okay? However, I'm gonna use a little trick here. I'm gonna grab that table calc that we've created through Tableau's dialogues, and if we grab the table calculation and drag and drop it into the data pane, unlike a normal field when you drag and drop it to the data pane and it removes it from your worksheet, this is actually gonna save a copy of this field for us, or it's gonna prompt us to name it and save it. So I'll call this percent difference in sales. And now I'm gonna edit our table calculation. So it looks like a bunch of crazy gibberish at first, but I'll explain what's going on here. Let me break this into a couple different lines so that we can kind of zoom in and talk about this a little better. Okay, so what is happening? So what Tableau is doing is it's saying, give me the sum of sales from a given data point and look up the sum of sales one data point ago, okay? Right now, this worksheet is set to table across. So when it says -1, So if this bar is 0, that's this bar's -1, this is its +1, right? Or if this bar is 0, this is its -1, this is its -2, this is its +1, this is its +2. You get the idea, right? So lookup, that is the table calculation function that is allowing all of this to take place, right? So lookup, it'll give you some really long friggin' definition, but basically it's just saying what I just told you. Okay, so it's saying take the value from a given data point, and let's put a copy of sales on tooltip so we can actually kind of vet this for ourselves. So take the value from a given data point. So Q4 2021, $280,000 worth of sales as compared to $196,000 from Q3. So that is a 42% jump. I don't really want to do the math right now, but we'll just assume that's true. So instead of just looking up 1 point in the past, why not look up 4 points in the past? Okay, so instead of saying, give me the sales from this quarter, subtract the sales from last quarter, and divide by the absolute value of sales from last quarter, we're gonna say, give me the sales from this quarter, but look up the sales from 4 quarters ago, and divide that by the absolute value of sales from 4 quarters ago, okay? Last little piece here is that the ZN function, that's just in case any of the values are null. If there's just randomly a quarter with no sales, you don't want it to like null out your calculation and end up with like all kinds of messed up stuff. So ZN just replaces null values or missing values with zeros. So I just applied it, and actually when we saved that table calc earlier, I should have called this out a little better, but it actually updated the reference of the table calculation in the worksheet as well. So you'll notice that's the percent difference in sales, which is the logic is now saved over here. So if I hit this drop down and select edit, it takes us right back here. So pretty cool, right? So the first 4 quarters, they all don't have a prior year to compare against, so they don't really get any sort of specialized coloring. Unfortunately, we don't know how those did compare to the prior year. Maybe there was no prior year. But from that point, now we got a kind of an interesting narrative, right? 2018 to 2019, it wasn't really much different, right? Each quarter was sort of roughly the same, up a couple percent, down a several percent, no big gains. The year after that, we started to see more upticks. Every quarter was positive year over year, sometimes pretty significantly so. And then mostly gains, one little drop off, mostly gains in the most recent year, but maybe a little bit more modest again. Okay. So I guess just kind of one top of mind thought that might be one of the last things I'll say about table calcs would be that any field that you're referencing in a table calculation needs to be aggregated, right? So it needs to be sum of sales or average sales or something like that. Tableau is not gonna take too kindly. Let me go all the way back to the beginning with window average, right? Tableau is not gonna take too kindly to you saying something like, give me the window average of sales, right? Tableau would give you an error and it would say that all fields must be aggregate or constant when using table calculation functions, okay? So to circle this all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, calculations is like adding a new column. Aggregations takes rows of data and then, summarizes them at the dimension level and returns an aggregated summarized output figure. And then a table calculation takes those summarized outputs, those aggregated values, and then does something with them. It allows you to average them or summarize them or compare one to the other, right? So this is the exact reason why Tableau needs the value you're referencing to be aggregated, because that's the whole point of a table calculation, is to reference aggregated data point values to be able to accomplish things like ranks, percent differences, averages, and things of that nature. So I hope this was a kind of a helpful deep dive for you into the basics of how table calculations work. Certainly we have some other videos that we'll be working on. We want to explore window functions further amongst others. So stay tuned. We drop videos like this every single week covering Tableau topics. We really appreciate you following along, and we look forward to catching you on the next one. Thank you so much.